I found out my husband had a second family on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was making school lunches. Not from a text message. Not from a stranger at the door. From a photograph that came up in the suggested memories feature on my phone, the kind that assembles itself from your camera roll and announces itself with the words, "Here's what you were doing 3 years ago." 3 years ago, I was at a birthday party for a child I had never met, in a kitchen I did not recognize, standing beside my husband, who had his arm around me and was smiling in the way he smiled when he was happy. The problem was the refrigerator behind us. I had looked at that refrigerator for 1 second before I understood. It had photographs on it, children's drawings, a calendar, the ordinary debris of a family's daily life pressed to a surface with magnets. And in the center of that refrigerator, among the drawings and the calendar and the ordinary debris, was a photograph of my husband with a woman I did not know and 2 children who looked like him. I stood at my kitchen counter with the bread knife in one hand and my phone in the other, and I looked at that refrigerator for a very long time. Then I finished making the lunches. My name is Helen. I am 44 years old. I have been married to David for 16 years, or I had been married to David for 16 years, or I am still technically married to David while the legal process catches up to the facts. The precise verb tense depends on what day you ask me and what part of the previous 14 months I am living inside when you do. I have 2 daughters. Nora is 15 and Mia is 12, and they are the reason I stood at the counter and finished the lunches after finding that photograph, and the reason I drove them to school and came home and sat at the kitchen table and thought very carefully about what I was going to do before I did anything at all. Let me take you back. Because the refrigerator is not where this story starts, and the Tuesday morning is not the whole of it. The whole of it starts 16 years ago, and it has a shape that I can see clearly now that I am standing far enough away from the inside of it. I met David when I was 27. He was 31, an architect, the kind of man who notices things, the light in a room, the proportion of a doorway, whether a building is working or merely functioning. I found this quality beautiful in the way that you find beautiful the things you are not naturally inclined to yourself. I am a nurse. I notice people. David noticed spaces. We saw the world through different instruments, and for 16 years I thought this was complementary. I think it still was, in some ways. That is one of the complicated things about this story. We married when I was 28. Nora was born the following year. Mia 3 years after that. We bought a house in a neighborhood with good schools and wide sidewalks and the kind of community that people move to when they have decided what kind of life they want to build. I loved our house. I still love it. I live there now with the girls with David gone. I love the kitchen and the backyard and the particular quality of light in the girls' rooms in the morning, which I have watched change as they have grown in those rooms. I loved my marriage. That is also complicated and also true. David was a good father. I will not take that from him because the story requires a villain and he is the nearest candidate. He was present and patient and the girls adored him, and some portion of what I grieve is not only my marriage but the father I thought he was and the father the girls thought they had, which are not exactly the same as the father he turned out to be. He was also, for what I now believe to be at least 8 years of our 16-year marriage, living a partial version of another life. 8 years. I have sat with that number many times. I have turned it over and looked at it from every angle and I have not found a way to make it smaller than it is. 8 years is not an affair. 8 years is not a mistake that continued longer than it should have. 8 years is a decision renewed repeatedly over a very long time. The woman's name is Andrea. She is 36 years old. She has 2 children. A boy who is 9 and a girl who is 6. The boy looks exactly like David. I have seen photographs. You cannot look at that boy and not see David, and this is one of the specific griefs of this story that I did not know how to prepare for and am still learning how to carry. I did not find these things out all at once. I found them out in the way that you find out things when someone has been hiding them carefully for a very long time. In layers over months, each new layer changing the shape of what you thought you understood. The first layer was the refrigerator photograph. I came home from taking the girls to school, and I sat at the kitchen table and I opened my phone and I looked at the photograph again. I looked at the kitchen, the refrigerator, the drawings, my husband's arm around me. I looked at what we were wearing, which let me estimate the season. I looked at what I was wearing specifically and cross-referenced it against my memory, and arrived at an approximate date. October 3 years ago. I was a nurse for 21 years before I became a nurse manager, and before that I was a nursing student who learned that observation precedes everything. You look before you act. You gather before you conclude. You do not administer treatment until you understand what you are treating. I applied this to the rest of the day. I went through our shared calendar for October 3 years ago. I found a weekend where David had been at a conference in Portland. I had not gone because Nora had been in a school play and I had not wanted to miss it. I searched his name in the metadata of the photograph. It had been taken on a Saturday in October 3 years ago, at approximately 2 in the afternoon. I cross-referenced this with the conference dates. The conference had been Thursday and Friday. Saturday was not the conference. I spent the rest of that Tuesday being a working mother with a household to manage and a job to go to and 2 daughters who needed dinner and help with homework and the ordinary infrastructure of their lives. And I did it all the way I had done it for 15 years, competently present without showing what was happening underneath. I have thought about that competence many times since. About what it means to be so practiced at managing the surface of things that you can continue managing it even when the thing beneath the surface has just fundamentally changed shape. I called my sister Ellen that evening after the girls were in bed. Ellen is 4 years older than me, and is the person I call when I need someone to think clearly alongside me without requiring me to manage their reaction to the thing I am telling them. She is a family law attorney, which turned out to be a practical coincidence on top of the emotional value. I told her about the photograph. I told her what I had found in the calendar and the metadata. I told her clearly and in order, the way I tell a doctor about a patient's presenting symptoms. Ellen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know yet. I need more information before I know what I am." She said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need to understand what I'm actually dealing with before I confront David, and I need to know what my options are." Ellen said, "The second one I can help with. For the first one, do you want me to recommend someone?" I said, "What kind of someone?" She said, "The kind who finds things." I said, "Yes." His name was Gregory. He was a private investigator Ellen had worked with on several cases, a quiet man who communicated primarily by email and who delivered information with the same neutrality I tried to bring to nursing assessments. Here is what is true, here is what it means, here is what you may wish to know next. Gregory's initial report came back in 3 weeks. I read it at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night after the girls were asleep. I had made tea I did not drink. I read it twice. Andrea had been in David's life for 9 years. Not 8-9. They had met through a project he had worked on in her city. The relationship had become serious within the first year. The children were 9 and 6. Which meant the boy had been born during our marriage and the girl had been born during our marriage, and David had been present for both births, which Gregory had confirmed through the particular paper trail that private investigators know how to read. 9 years. Our marriage was 16 years old. David had been living this parallel life for more than half of our marriage. I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. I did not cry. I want to tell you that, not because it makes me seem stronger than I am, but because I think it matters. I did not cry because I was in the stage that comes before crying, the stage of pure information processing, the stage where you are taking in something so large that your body has not yet found the translation for it. The crying came later. It came in the car on the way to work and in the shower, and once, memorably, in the parking lot of a grocery store on a Sunday afternoon when I put a box of his cereal in the cart out of habit, and then stood there holding it for 3 minutes while the world continued happening around me. But that Tuesday morning and that Wednesday night I did not cry. I gathered information. I thought about what I was going to do. Ellen and I met for lunch the following Saturday. We sat in a restaurant booth in the back where we could not be overheard, and I told her everything Gregory had found, and she told me everything I needed to know about my options. We talked for 2.5 hours. At the end of it, Ellen said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to talk to David." She said, "When?" I said, "When I know everything I need to know. I'm not going to do it until I have a complete picture." She said, "How complete?" I said, "Complete enough that there's nothing he can tell me that changes the picture. I don't want to go into that conversation and have him be able to reframe anything." Ellen looked at me for a moment. She said, "Helen, are you sure you're okay?" I said, "I will be. Right now I'm functional, which is what I need to be." She said, "The girls." I said, "The girls don't know anything. I'm going to make sure it stays that way until I have a plan for what happens after." Ellen said, "I'm going to need to be involved in whatever comes next. Legally." I said. I know. That's why I called you first. She reached across the table and held my hand for a moment. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I went home and made dinner and helped Mia with a science project and listened to Nora's accounting of the social dynamics of her friend group, which is a subject I find genuinely interesting, and I went to bed beside my husband who had been living a parallel life for 9 years, and I lay in the dark and I thought about what comes next. David had no idea. That is the thing that I have had to sit with most carefully, because it implicates me in a way that I find uncomfortable. I lay beside him in that bed for 6 more weeks while I gathered information and met with Ellen and prepared, and he had no idea, and I was, deliberately, skillfully, giving him no reason to. I was observing before acting. I was gathering before concluding. I was not administering treatment until I understood what I was treating. That is what I told myself. I also think it was true. I told him on a Thursday evening in December, 6 weeks after the refrigerator photograph. The girls were at a sleepover which I had arranged. David was in his office at the back of the house working. I knocked. He looked up. I said, I need you to come to the kitchen. I need to show you something. He came to the kitchen. I had a laptop open on the table. Gregory's report was on the screen, organized into a document I had prepared, not to show him but for myself to have the shape of it in front of me while we talked. I said, I know about Andrea. I know about the children. I know how long it has been. David went still in the way of someone whose body has made a decision faster than his mind has caught up. He said, Helen. I said, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you what I know, and to tell you what happens next. He said, Can I explain? I said, Not yet. Let me finish. I told him what I knew in the same order I had read it in Gregory's report. The 9 years. The children. The dates I had cross-referenced. The conference that had not been a conference. I told him what was going to happen. That I had spoken to my sister. That we would be separating. That the girls would be our first priority in every decision. That I was not interested in a conversation that was organized around his feelings about what he had done, because that was a conversation for him to have with a therapist, which I strongly suggested he do. I said, I'm not angry in the way you might expect. I'm going to be angry probably, but right now I'm clear. He said, Helen, I'm sorry. I said, I know you are. That's not what I need right now. He said, What do you need? I said, I need you to be completely honest with me when I ask you questions, and I need you to make this as manageable as possible for Nora and Mia, and I need you to not make me fight for any of the practical things that need to happen. Can you do those things? He said, Yes. He meant it. I believe he meant it. And he has largely done those things in the 14 months since, which is its own complicated thing to hold. The man who lived a parallel life for 9 years is also the man who has not made me fight for any of the practical things. These are not contradictions. They are the specific, difficult complexity of a person who contains more than one truth. I told the girls on a Saturday morning in January. Nora and Mia at the kitchen table, David beside me, the 4 of us in the room where we had been a family for 11 years. It was the hardest hour of my life. I say that without qualification. Nora cried immediately and then stopped and asked questions with the direct precision of someone who needs information in order to process. Mia cried for 20 minutes and then sat very still, and when she finally spoke she said, Are we still a family? And David and I said yes at the same time, and I believe we meant it, and I believe Mia heard that we meant it, and I believe that mattered. The separation moved the way these things move when both people have decided that the children are the priority and have committed to making it as clean as possible. David moved out in February. He found an apartment 15 minutes from the house. He is with the girls every Wednesday evening and every other weekend and more when the schedule allows and when Nora and Mia want it. He has not ended things with Andrea. I understand this in the particular way that you understand things you would not have chosen. He has a 9-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl who did not choose any of this either, and whatever I think of Andrea and whatever I think of the choices David made, I do not hold those children responsible for them. I tell you this because I want to be honest about the full complexity of what happened and not just the parts that make me sympathetic. I was devastated. I am also not destroyed. Both things are true. What the 14 months have looked like. I am still a nurse manager at the same hospital. I went back to work 3 days after telling David because work was where I knew who I was and I needed to be somewhere I knew who I was. My colleagues, most of whom knew nothing, treated me exactly as they always had, which was what I needed. I have been seeing a therapist. Her name is Dr. Osei. She has an office with a plant that she talks to when she thinks I am not paying attention. And she has a gift for asking the question that I have been avoiding in a way that makes me willing to answer it. She asked me once several months in what I was most afraid of. I said, that I missed it. That it was there and I didn't see it. She said, did you? I thought about it honestly. I said, I think I saw things and chose the interpretation that fit the life I believed I had. She said, is that the same as missing it? I said, no, but it feels like it sometimes. She said, what's the difference? I said, missing it would mean I didn't look. I looked. I just didn't let myself conclude. She said, why not? I said, because the conclusion required me to be wrong about everything. She said, were you wrong about everything? I thought about the girls. About Nora's precise, information-hungry grief and Mia's still silence and the question she had asked at the kitchen table. Are we still a family? And the yes that David and I had said at the same moment. I said, no. I was wrong about David. I was right about the family. She nodded. She wrote something down. Nora's 15 now. She is in the specific season of adolescence that requires managing a great many things simultaneously, and does it with the focused competence of someone who is going to be extremely effective at whatever she decides to do with her life. She talks to me about David with the particular maturity of a teenager who has understood something adult without entirely having the tools to hold it, and I listen and I try to give her the space to feel what she feels without needing me to validate or invalidate it. Mia is 12. She is quieter than Nora about most things and louder about specific things, which has always been her way. She asked me last spring if I was okay. Not the way children ask reflexively, expecting a reflexive answer. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and she asked with her eyes on my face and her hands still and her full attention on the answer. I said, I'm getting there. She said, what does getting there feel like? I thought about it. I said, like most days I'm okay and some days I'm not and the days I'm not are getting fewer. She nodded. She said, that sounds right. I said, Mia, are you okay? She said, same as you. We sat at the kitchen table for a while without talking, my 12-year-old daughter and I, in the house that is ours now, in the kitchen with the morning light I have always loved. I am 44 years old. I live in my house with my daughters and a dog named Bee who arrived 8 months ago because Mia had been asking and I had finally run out of reasons to say not yet. I work at the hospital I have worked at for 12 years. I see Dr. Osei every 2 weeks. I have friends who know everything and who have shown up in the specific, practical ways that good friends show up. With food and with presence and with the willingness to sit in the kitchen and not require me to be further along than I am. I am not entirely okay yet. I am going to be. The refrigerator photograph is still on my phone. I have not deleted it. I am not sure why I have not deleted it. Perhaps because it is evidence of something I needed to understand, or perhaps because deleting it would be a decision I am not yet ready to make, or perhaps simply because I have not thought about it on a day when I had the clarity to decide. It will be there when I am ready. I found out my husband had a second family on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was making school lunches. I finished making the lunches. I drove the girls to school. I came home and I sat at the table and I thought about what I was going to do. And then I did it carefully and completely and in the right order, the way I have done every difficult thing in my life. That is who I am. That is who I have always been. No one gets to take that.